Hey there, pilots! This is Dauntless Sam, and today we'll be looking at the history of the Bristol Blenheim and its flight characteristics in War Thunder. The Bristol Blenheim was a British light bomber aircraft designed and built by the Bristol Aeroplane Company that was used extensively in the early days of the Second World War. It was adapted as an interim long-term and night fighter, pending the availability of the Beaufighter. It was one of the first British aircraft to have all-metal stressed skin construction, to utilize retractable landing gear, flaps, a powered gun turret, and variable pitch propellers. A Canadian-built variant named the Bolingbroke was used as an anti-submarine and training aircraft. The Blenheim Mark I outshone most biplane fighters in the late 1930s, but stood little chance against the German Messerschmitt Bf 109 during daylight operations, though it proved successful as a night fighter. The Mark IV variant was equally unsuccessful in its daylight bombing role, suffering major losses in the early stages of the war. In 1934, Lord Rothermere, owner of the Daily Mail newspaper, challenged the British aviation industry to build a high-speed aircraft capable of carrying 6 passengers and 2 crew members. At the time, German firms were producing a variety of record-breaking high-speed designs, such as the Heinkel HE-70, and Rothermere wanted to recapture the title of the fastest civilian aircraft in Europe. Bristol had been working on a suitable design as the Type 135 since July 1933, and further adapted it to produce the Type 142 to meet Rothermere's requirements. Named Britain First, the first flew at Filton on April 12, 1935, and proved to be faster than any fighter in service in the Royal Air Force at the time. The Air Ministry was obviously interested in such aircraft, and quickly sent out specification B-2835 for prototypes of a bomber version, the Type 142M, M standing for military. The main change was to move the wing from the low wing to a mid-wing position, allowing room under the main spar for a bomb bay. The aircraft was all metal, with 2 Bristol Mercury 8 air-cooled radial engines, each of 860 horsepower. It carried a crew of 3, a pilot, navigator bombardier, and a telegraphist air gunner. Armament comprised of a single forward-firing 30 caliber Browning machine gun outboard to the port engine, and a 30 caliber Lewis gun in a semi-tracking Bristol Type B Mark I dorsal turret firing to the rear. From 1939 onwards, the Lewis gun was replaced by the more modern 30 caliber Vickers VGO machine gun of the same caliber. A 1,000-pound bomb load could be carried in the internal bay. To achieve its relatively high speed, the Blenheim had a very small fuselage cross-section, with its upper front glazing all at one angle in the form of a stepless cockpit that used no separate windscreen panels for the pilot. The pilot's quarters on the left side of the nose were so cramped that the control yoke obscured all flight instruments while engine instruments eliminated the forward view on landings. Most secondary instruments were arranged along the left side of the cockpit, with essential items like propeller pitch control actually placed behind the pilot, where they had to be operated by feel alone. Like most contemporary British aircraft, the bomb bay doors were kept closed with bungee cords and opened under the weight of releasing bombs. Because there was no way to predict how long it would take for the bombs to force the doors open, bombing accuracy was consequently poor. The aircraft was ordered directly from the drawing board, with the first production model serving as the only prototype. The service name became the Blenheim Mark I after the famous battle during the War of the Spanish Succession. Subsequent deliveries started on the 10th of March, 1937, with a 114 Squadron being the first squadron to receive the Blenheim. The aircraft was built under license by countries including Finland and Yugoslavia, which built 60 aircraft. Other countries bought it, including Romania, Greece, and Turkey. Total production of the Blenheim Mark I in England was 1,351 aircraft. Work on an extended-range reconnaissance version started as the Blenheim Mark II, which increased tankage from 278 gallons to 468 gallons, but only one was completed. Another modification resulted in the Blenheim Mark III, which lengthened the nose and thereby dispensed with the stepless cockpit format of the Mark I, introducing a true widescreen in front of the pilot to provide more room for the bombardier. This required the nose to be scooped out in front of the pilot to maintain visibility during takeoff and landing. However, both of these modifications were instead combined, along with a newer version of the Mercury engine with 905 horsepower, and the turret acquired a pair of Brownings instead of the Vickers K, creating the Blenheim Mark IV. A total of 3,307 were produced. Another modification led to the long-range fighter version, the Blenheim Mark IF. For this role, about 200 Blenheims were fitted with a gun pack under the fuselage with 4 30 caliber Brownings. Later, the Airborne Intercept Mark III or IV radar was fitted to some aircraft as used as night fighters. These were the first British fighters to be equipped with radar. Their performance was marginal as a fighter, but they served as an interim type, pending availability of the Beaufighter. About 60 Mark IVs were also equipped with the gun pack as the Mark IV-F, and were used by Coastal Command to protect convoys from German long-range bombers. The last bomber variant was conceived as an armored ground attack aircraft, with a nose containing 4 more Browning machine guns. Originally known as the Bisley, after the shooting competitions held at Bisley, the production aircraft were renamed the Blenheim Mark V and featured a strengthened structure, pilot armor, interchangeable nose gun pack or bombardier position, and yet another Mercury variant, this time with 950 horsepower. The Mark V was ordered for conventional bombing operations, with the removal of armor in most of the glazed nose section. The Mark V, or Type 160, was used primarily in the Middle East and Far East. The Blenheim served as the basis for the Beaufort torpedo bomber, which itself led to the Beaufighter, with the lineage performing 2 complete circles of bomber to fighter. On the day that war was declared on Germany, a Blenheim piloted by Flying Officer Andrew McPherson was the first British aircraft to cross the German coast, and the following morning 15 Blenheims from 3 squadrons set off on one of the first bombing missions. With the rapid advances in technology which had taken place in the late 1930s, by then the aircraft was already obsolete. The Blenheim was regarded as a pleasant aircraft to fly, although it did have some characteristics which would catch experienced pilots by surprise. It had become heavier as extra service equipment was installed. Much of this was found to be needed through operational experience. This, coupled with the rapid performance increases of fighters, had eclipsed the Blenheim's speed advantage. The light armament of 130 caliber Vickers VGO in the turret and 130 caliber Browning machine gun in the port wing was seldom able to deter fighter opposition. Squadrons were forced to use several different improvisations in attempt to provide better defense armament, until officially sanctioned modifications were available to be introduced in early 1940. The Blenheim also proved vulnerable to flak, especially around the rear fuselage. Flexible self-sealing liners had been fitted to the fuel tanks, but they were still not fully protected against the 20mm MG-FF cannon carried by the Luftwaffe's Bf-109s and Bf-110s. After France fell to Germany in June 1940, the Free French Air Force was formed at RAF Oldham, consisting of a mixed bag of Blenheims and Westland Lysander liaison observation aircraft, which eventually went to North Africa and saw action against the Italians and Germans. During the Battle of Britain, the Blenheim units operated throughout battle, often taking heavy casualties, although they were never accorded the publicity of the fighter squadrons. The Blenheim units raided German-occupied airfields throughout July to December 1940, both during daylight hours and at night. Although most of these raids were unproductive, there were some successes. On the 1st of August, 5 out of 12 Blenheims sent to attack Hampstead and Brussels were able to bomb, destroy, or heavily damage 3 Bf-109s. 2 other 109s were claimed by Blenheim gunners. Another successful raid on Hampstead was made by a single Blenheim on the 7th of August, which destroyed 1 Bf-109, heavily damaged another, and caused lighter damage to 4 more. There were also some missions which produced almost 100% casualty rate among the Blenheims. One such operation was mounted on the 13th of August, 1940 against Luftwaffe airfield near Aalborg in northeastern Denmark of 12 aircraft of 82 Squadron. One Blenheim returned early. The pilot was later charged and due to appear before court-martial but was killed in another operation. The other 11, which reached Denmark, were shot down, 5 by flak and 6 by Bf-109s. Blenheim-equipped units had been formed to carry out long-range strategic reconnaissance missions over Germany and German-occupied territories, as well as bombing operations. In this role, the Blenheims were once again proved to be too slow and vulnerable against Luftwaffe fighters, and they took constant casualties. The Cologne power station raid on August 12, 1941, was described by the Daily Telegraph in 2006 as the RAF's most audacious and dangerous low-level bombing raid, a large-scale attack against power stations near Cologne. The raid was a low-level daylight raid by 54 Blenheims. The Blenheims hit their targets, Fortuna power stations and Goldberg power station, but 12 of the Blenheims were lost during the raid, 22% of those who took part, which was far above the sustainable loss rate of less than 5%. The Bristol Blenheim was used by both bomber and fighter commands. Some 200 Mark I bombers were modified into Mark I-F long-range fighters. By 1939, at least 7 squadrons were operating with these twin-engined fighters, and within a few months, some 60 squadrons had experience of the type. The Mark I-F proved to be slower and less nimble than expected, and by June 1940, daylight Blenheim losses were the cause for concern for Fighter Command. It was then decided that the Mark I-F would be relegated mainly to night fighter duties, where it had better success. In the German night bombing raid on London on June 18, 1940, Blenheims accounted for 5 German bombers, thus proving that they were better suited for night fighting. In July, No. 600 Squadron, by then based at RAF Manston, had some of its Mark I-Fs equipped with AI Mark III radar. With this radar equipment, a Blenheim from the Fighter Interception Unit at RAF Ford achieved the first success on the night of July 2nd to 3rd, 1940, accounting for a Do-17 bomber. More successes came, and before long the Blenheim proved itself invaluable as a night fighter. Gradually, with the introduction of the Bristol Beaufighter in 1940 to 1941, the Blenheim was supplanted as its faster, better-armed descendant. Blenheims continued to operate widely in many combat roles until about 1943, equipping RAF squadrons in the UK and in British bases in Egypt, Iraq, Aden, India, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies. Many Blenheims were lost due to Japanese fighters during the Malayan Campaign, battles for Singapore, and Sumatra. By that point, the traditional daylight light bomber role was more effectively carried out by suitable fighter bombers, and the surviving examples were relegated to training duties. Nonetheless, the Blenheim played a role in preventing India from falling and recapturing Burma, destroying over 60 aircraft on the ground in raids on Bangkok early in the campaign. The Air Ministry's replacement for the Blenheim as a daylight bomber, another Bristol design, the Buckingham, was overtaken by events and changes in requirements and considered inferior to the Mosquito, and as such did not see combat. In 1936, the Finnish Air Force ordered 18 Blenheim Mark Is from Britain, and 2 years later they obtained a manufacturing license for the aircraft. Before any aircraft could be manufactured at the State Airplane Factory in Finland, the Winter War broke out, forcing the Finns to order more aircraft from the UK. A further 24 British-manufactured Blenheims were ordered during the Winter War. After the Winter War, 55 Blenheims were constructed in Finland, bringing the total number to 97 aircraft. The Finns also received 20 half-completed ex-Yugoslavian Mark IV Blenheims captured by Germany, together with manufacturing tools and production equipment, as well as a huge variety of spare parts. Yugoslavia had ceased production of the Mark I and commenced a production run of Mark IVs just prior to April 1941 invasion. The Finnish Blenheims flew 423 missions during the Winter War, and close to 3,000 missions during the Continuation War and Lapland War. Blenheim machine gunners also shot down 8 Soviet aircraft. 37 Blenheims were lost in combat during the war. After the war, Finland was prohibited from flying bomber aircraft by the Paris Peace Treaty, with Finland's Blenheims being placed into storage in 1948. However, in 1951, 5 Blenheims were reactivated for use as target tugs, with the last flight of the Finnish Blenheim taking place on May 20th, 1958. In War Thunder, the only variant of the Blenheim is the Mark IV. It is a rank 1 with a battle rating of 1.7, with a maximum speed of 425 km an hour, a turn time of 24.6 seconds, and a rate of climb of 5.9 meters per second. It is a fairly nimble bomber. It can be loaded with either 4 250-pound bombs or 2 500-pound bombs. It is defended by 1 dorsal gunner armed with a 7.7mm machine gun and 1 rear-facing nose gunner with a 7.7mm machine gun on the underside of the aircraft. Even though it is a bomber, it is armed with 1 wing-mounted, pilot-controlled 7.7mm machine gun with 500 rounds of ammunition. This gun is not good for taking down aircraft, but is fairly decent at strafing light ground targets once you have run out of bombs. Because your only weapon is a wing-mounted gun, be aware of what your gun convergence is set at. Since the aircraft is so light, it is quite maneuverable for its size. While you may not be able to turn fight in it, and why would you want to, it makes it a slightly more difficult target to hit when taking evasive maneuvers. I hope that this information has proved helpful. If you liked the video, please do like the video. If you'd like to see more videos like this, feel free to subscribe to the channel, and if you think anyone else would be interested in this video, don't be afraid to share it. This is Dauntless Sam, thanks for watching.